Teachers have read it who've had students go on to become murderers/violent criminals. Were there any signs they were capable of such things when you taught them? Teacher of middle school here. Had a weird kid. He was nice to everyone, but when nobody was watching, he would make his hands into a strangling motion. Sometime in the year, we got a pet hamster, and someone could look after it. A week later, the hamster was dead with a broken neck. When I asked who it was clear that it was the kid because of the way he looked. He looked guilty, but I said nothing as I had no evidence. Fast forward 10 years and it turns out he's in jail. What for? Stabbing a mother of 2 for her purse. Was this an intentional bait and switch? Like, was I just bamboozled because I thought it was going to be strangling? That seems to be where all the signs were pointing. I feel fooled, and it's only the first one. Story 2. I've had one former student tried as an accessory to capital murder, and another awaiting trial for capital murder. In both cases, the crimes were very violent, all over the news, and in both cases, I wasn't that surprised when I heard about it. However, there wasn't a time where I looked at either boy and thought, he's going to unalive someone someday. What I did think was that they were going to probably pop off to the wrong person at some point and end up in jail or shot. Both boys were very disrespectful to both teachers and other students. Could be charming, but had hair-trigger tempers, and a great dislike of having to follow any rules. However, I've had many students like that grow out of it. I don't look at a student who's a discipline problem and automatically assume he or she will be a murderer. It does suck when it happens, though. Story 3. Lots of my students are in gangs. A few have been arrested for murder and such. Sad to say, but at an inner-city school, I'm not entirely shocked when kids from our district are in the paper for any sort of crime. The schools try to do something about it when the kids are young, but it's tough when their dads, uncles, neighbors, etc. are in gangs. Yeah, when the environment around the kid is leading them to that life, it's almost impossible to stop it. At least with certainty. You can do all you can, but there's always a chance they're still gonna end up that way. You're doing important work though, OP. Hats off to you. Story 4. I used to work at a boarding school in England. We had a kid named Tom who came from an orphanage. Tom was one of the brightest students I ever taught. To be fair, he was actually one of my favorite students at the time, and I'm quite sure almost all the other teachers liked him too. I believed he was one of those kids who would make it in life, not only because he was a clever student, but Tom was able to be very convincing. He had a great influence on other students. But in retrospect, I should have seen some signs. Quite often, he stayed after class to ask some questions. One of these times, Tom showed a great interest in Horcruxes. It's obvious I haven't told him anything about it. Horcruxes is a Harry Potter word, right? This is the second bamboozle, well, probably second, maybe first bamboozle of the thread already? On Story 4, I'm pretty sure this is a Harry Potter reference. Story 5. New teacher here, and I teach elementary school, so no major crimes yet. But I have had one kid who I swear will be all over the news in the future for something horrendous. Be it murder or assault or a school shooting. He had no empathy whatsoever, and this in itself is worrying. But there are people with a little empathy who turn out fine. Not this kid. He would hurt the little girls in my class just to watch them cry. Whenever it would happen, I would rush over to the little girl, or if it was outdoor recess, the staff member outside would, and he would just be standing there staring at her with the weirdest look on his face. Not a smirk, necessarily, but just odd. Most little kids will either run away or try to look innocent if you catch them, but never him. He just didn't give a crap. I asked him once why he was always so mean to this one sweet little girl in particular. He said she was his favorite. I could barely control my horrified expression. Like I said, he's going to be on the news eventually. I just hope I don't find out what he did. Yeah, these are some early warning signs if I've ever heard them. Maybe something can still be done, but it's hard to tell what his home environment is like and what led him to be like this. Hoping the best for the kid though. Story 6. I subbed for home ec cooking class for a couple of weeks. There was one girl who struck me as a bit odd. It's hard to describe, but I got a bad vibe. She got angry very easily, had zero patience, did not respond well to authority, and would threaten anyone who annoyed her. Obnoxious, yes, but I felt like there was more to it. I asked the department head, and she told me this girl, about 16, was kicked out of her old school for getting into physical fights and manipulating another student, a boy with a learning disability. She tried to get him to stab a teacher. If I see her name crop up in the news in the future, I will not be in the least bit surprised. Story 7. There are definitely indications that something could be seriously wrong. I had one female student who was obviously giving off signs that she was ill. When she was finally diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder at the age of 13, I received a few apologies from colleagues to whom I had expressed concerns about this child. She was expelled in 8th grade for organizing a murder plot against another girl in her class. She tried to get 4 girls to back her up. One of them turned her in to administrators the day of the attempted murder. The victim was not stabbed to death as she had planned. She was not charged. Her mother blamed her ADHD. Really? Her mother made a point of bringing her onto campus every day after the expulsion because she had another child at the school. Mom had problems of her own. I had hoped she would not have children. She recently gave birth to a second child. Neither child trapped the man she was trying to get to marry her. She keeps in touch with former students and teachers through Facebook. She doesn't realize we're watching for signs that she might harm these children. I had another student ask me for help. He was planning to unalive his mother and twin brothers. He was caught by one brother assaulting and unaliving a litter of kittens. He was already unaliving animals and mutilating them regularly. He asked me to help turn himself in before he started unaliving people. We had a conversation in which he told me that I was the only adult who had ever been honest with him. I helped him. He has been institutionalized since he was 14. This child ended up in my class after being expelled from another school for bringing a knife to school to unalive a girl who he said was ugly. After being suspended for having the knife, he walked to school with a gun intending to shoot the principal. Then he became my student. That must be insanely hard as a kid to realize that you are going to be a threat. And if you're going to do that and say that you want someone to help you, you don't want to be, but you can't stop yourself because whatever's going on. That's absolutely brutal. Institutionalization doesn't have the best track record, but I hope the kid somehow is doing better now. As for the first girl, I'm not so hopeful if the mom just doesn't seem to recognize that there's a problem at all. Kids who are like this are usually like this for a reason, and that reason is usually something in their home life. So once that's all messed up, it's hard to get away from it. Story 8. We had a course mate who was intelligent, shy, and nervous. His father was a professor and his mother was a teacher. He had a friend. He tried to unalive his friend's grandma with a screwdriver. Everything was planned except that he was not expecting resistance. Did not succeed and now serving 16 years in jail. Story 9. I taught a high school student that had a lot of impulse control issues. He was labeled EBD, emotional/behavioral disorder, in our special ed program and needed a lot of support. We got along pretty well, and I think deep down he had a good heart, but he would fly into fits of rage when frustrated. After he graduated, I didn't hear anything about him for a year or two. Then I read in the news that he was being charged with second-degree murder. His girlfriend had a 2-year-old and she left him alone with her child to babysit while she was at work. Apparently, the toddler started crying and he couldn't handle it. He did something to her which fractured her skull. When mom came home, the toddler was non-responsive. She died the next day at the hospital. He's now in prison for the next 20 years. I can't say that I ever thought he would do something this terrible, but I'm not surprised he wasn't able to handle this situation and lost control. It's so sad because he had so much support at school, but once he left, it was all taken away and he was on his own. I think it's tragic that all of this happened, and I wish there had been more services in place to help him once he had graduated. Story 10. Teacher here. A veteran one too. I'm only posting here because finally a serious message can be sent, viewed, and perhaps start a change. I know which kids of mine are going to go down that path. We see this all the time, and us good ones pick up on body language and such because it's an essential and useful tool to use. Anyhow, listen. Just ask the teachers who the troubled kids are and give the public schools the goddamn money and proper support for mental health services for the schools. For all the kids, not just the sick ones either. We can significantly help societies really mend their wounds that way. But guess what? Social services in the schools are amongst the first to be cut. Teachers get cut too. The people that stay and never get cut, oh, that's right, the administration. These schools are being run in a business model now. People need to wake the hell up and deal with stuff like this. This isn't right. Story 11. I hate to admit it, but I will check arrest records annually for one of my former students. He hasn't committed a crime that I know of, but I'm fairly certain he will. When he was in middle school, he was caught with hardcore bondage adult content. When the school called his mom, she said, "I know, I gave it to him. How else is he supposed to learn about banging?" When he was in my class, he would pull down his pants, sit at his desk bare-bottomed, and make lewd motions directed at girls in the class. I would send him to the office, but they would send him back when he told them his pants were too big and he needed a belt. His mom won a lawsuit against the district for discrimination at some point in the past, and they were terrified of her. I like to believe the best in people, but that kid just wasn't right. There are good, legitimate developmental reasons to not expose children to adult content too early. There are ways for these sorts of topics to be discussed with a younger crowd, but it requires a little more care than just handing them a hardcore bondage mag or whatever. Oh my god. What, just 0 out of 10, huge L parenting. Story 12. This was a first for me this summer. A 17-year-old boy in my town was arrested for a string of armed robberies. I taught him when he was 14, 15. He was a nice kid. I never had disciplinary problems with him, and I recall him being an average student. He did hang out with some jerks, though, and I think they had too much influence on him. I was very surprised when I heard he was arrested. I've had other students that I suspect might end up in jail, but so far haven't seen them on the news yet. Story 13. Not a teacher. There were 2 kids in the year below me, both odd in their own ways. One unalived his girlfriend's mother with a screwdriver. Apparently, the mother was always trying to split them up. She did something, and then one day, he snapped. Coincidentally, my girlfriend is ex-police and moved into his old house, as he was no longer needing it with going to prison. The other guy assaulted and stabbed his mother, buying himself a one-way ticket to the big house. How awful it must have been to be the mother of the girlfriend in this scenario. She obviously knew that something was very wrong with this kid. And yet, if her daughter won't listen to her, what can she do? And it ended up taking her life? That's probably the worst well, no, not the worst possible outcome, because I know someone will say it, but like, way worse than you would ever imagine in the moment. Story 14. Not a teacher, but in 6th grade I was in a class with a guy who my friend's sister was trying to sleep with. He was 3 to 4 years older than all of us, would shave daily and have full stubble in by 7th period. He was a jerk to students and teachers. He was also like 6'4" and wasn't afraid to swing at teachers. In 7th grade he got expelled and arrested for forcing 6th graders to blow him in the bathroom. Okay, at first I thought, oh, just an aggressive kid who probably isn't the best developmentally in terms of intelligence, right? That sucks, and people who are mentally stunted can tend to be more aggressive. That's rough. The last part, though, went from unfortunate kid in an unfortunate situation where things should be better to, oh, just absolutely a menace to society. On one hand, I hope he got the help he needed. On the other hand, I know how hard it is to reform someone at that point in their life, especially when it's already gotten that bad. Story 15. I taught behaviorally and emotionally disturbed kids about 10 years back. Most of my kids were pretty terrible students, but one in particular had a severe case of oppositional defiance disorder. During the year I was teaching him, he got into a fight in the hallway and was expelled, as this wasn't his first. He went on to murder 2 people in a drug deal gone bad several months later. My primary thoughts were absolutely no surprise there. Thank goodness he'll be off the streets for a few years. Glad it wasn't an innocent civilian. Story 16. I had a student once that all the teachers hated. I taught 7th and 8th grade music in Erie, Pennsylvania, and I had a lot of trouble getting the students used to discipline in general. Anyway, this kid started excelling in my class. I would let him take his tests verbally at a discrete time so no one would know that he couldn't read very well. He would get up and demonstrate instruments he learned to play while he was at juvie, etc. Then, one day, he wasn't there anymore. He and a friend decided to jump the next guy they saw because they were bored. Put the guy in intensive care, both to be tried as adults. Did I see any signs? Oh, yeah. Held back from high school twice, no parental involvement, fighting in other classes, former juvie sentence, indifference about not being able to read. Story 17. Teacher at a rural school, hardly any discipline problems. Kid may get a suspension for tobacco every once in a while. Anyway, one kid's been in the district 11 years since kindergarten. I've got him as a sophomore. He's a small kid, kind of has that little man syndrome of having to be extra tough. But he's also a bit off, so no one really messes with him. I never really had any real issues with him. He just never did his work. I told him he was going to fail, and he was perfectly okay with that. He wanted to go the GED route anyway. One day I asked for a simple assignment to be turned in, and he blew me off. I pressed the issue because it was something that could be done in 5 minutes, and by not doing it, he was using it as an act of defiance in front of the class. He left angry, still didn't do it by the way, and I mentioned it to some staff later. The next day, in another class, this student mentioned if there was one teacher he would unalive, it would be me. A responsible student reported his statement to the principal, and he was called to the office. After his meeting with the principal called and said, "Nothing to worry about, it's just this guy looking cool in front of his friends, it's no big deal." No suspension, no detention, nothing. So I go out of my way to meet him after school that day and ask him point blank when he plans on doing it so I can tell my wife and kids goodbye, because nobody else thinks he's capable of doing this but me. He just grins back. Next morning he comes in with some sort of god complex and says, "It's okay, mister, I was just kidding." Fast forward a year after he quit school. He goes to a boys' camp and is there for about a month. After being there, he decides to go AWOL from this facility and in the middle of the day shows up in my classroom wearing a trench coat. I crap you not, I'm thinking I'm totally screwed. First, how in the hell did he get in? And secondly, I'm his first person he's come to visit. That's when stuff usually starts to go down in these mass shootings, or so I've heard. I'm nowhere near my phone, door is shut, no students in the room thankfully. We proceed to talk. I ask him about how life has been, trying all sorts of positive small talk I can think of. He's calm and actually quite proud of his escape. I ask him to take off his coat and stay a while, and he immediately does, thereby letting me see he doesn't have at least a large weapon on him. Soon, I can tell he's not there to hurt anyone and just didn't have any other place to go. Even though I'm the one on his hit list, I'm also the one he told was honest with him and didn't put up with any of his crap. Fast forward 6 months. After our school visit, I get the story from his younger brother that while at the halfway house he was at, he and another guy attempted to murder a worker with a knife and took another employee hostage with them as they fled the facility. He's now serving 20 plus years in the state penitentiary, and all I can remember is thinking back to those words my principal said. "Oh, he's not capable of that. Don't worry about it. It's no big deal." This story is frightening, but it does go to show that treating these kids somewhat seriously, and I don't mean treating them like threats all the time. I just mean seriously, like OP did. Like being straight up with them and telling them, and also knowing that they can be a threat, but also approaching them still as a human with compassion and just, as I said, telling them how it is. It can go a long way for them. It really sounds like that the kid just came there because OP was the only one that he had a real connection with, even if it was negative. It's interesting to think about because these cases are never cut and dry on how to think about them or what to do about them. I think it's unfortunate that the kid didn't have more people like OP in his life. Maybe things would have turned out different, who knows? Story 18. I had a friend in school who my parents were terrified of. I was 9 or 10 and I couldn't stay away from him for some reason. Even though our relationship consisted of him being extremely nice to me for short periods of time and then orchestrating an often bloody fistfight. I remember him straddling me and beating the living crap out of me in the playground after school one day. I was bloody and screaming for help, and parents were all around us just walking by like it wasn't happening. That's just people for you. He was in and out of institutions for years and would randomly just come back to my school before disappearing again. Whenever we did see each other again, he would talk of his fantasy in which he unalived both our parents. Then we would go and live in a shack in the forest somewhere together. The last time I saw him as a kid was when he tried to burn my house down. He orchestrated it so we would be leaving the house after he'd lit the match. Luckily, my dad was around after we left and smelt it before it really got going. He was sent to a pretty heavy-duty institution sometime after that. Anyway, I randomly bumped into him last year. We've been great friends ever since. He's a fitness instructor, performs in amateur MMA tournaments, has the most positive and gracious and just plain chilled-out outlook on life. Oh, and a truly beautiful, doting family. This is incredibly impressive and surprising. Never would I expect a kid like this who actually starts a fire to burn the house down to turn out to do all right. Arson is usually a pretty big indicator of something is not so good in the brain. But seriously, I am happy the kid got his act together and things worked out. If only the kids in every other story in here were that lucky. This thread was a little intense. Early warning signs in children are very real and should be taken seriously. That being said, taken seriously is a little bit vague and not super clear on what to do, but I am always a big proponent of mental health and mental health issues. So I hope that one day we do figure it out and we can make the world so cheesy. Make the world a better place, but kinda, yeah. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and I'll see you in the next one.